And seems like I am back in the new year. Here I am. Let's see. Picking up where I left off last time. Some minor adjustments and some discoveries that I want to touch on before I get started. And that is the AI terminal that I was building for the sandbox. That's why this stream is zeroed in onto that feature now. I believe it's a core feature, not just for the sandbox, but for AI apps moving forward. I did some research on web terminals, Claude code, that I will be integrated into this at some point, but for now I just want to get a bare bones working version of this, which will be using an Anthropic model to generate some UI components that I will bind to some tools. So obviously this still be functioning as a chat, but it'll be more of like a log of user input and AI output. And I'll try to be as strict with it as possible, but eventually that will change into an actual terminal, which will be using some open source terminal libraries and Anthropic commands integrated into it. So you'll be able to, instead of chatting, you'll be inputting commands, or the user will be inputting commands, and it'll produce output that is terminal-like with some, with some UI stuff in there. You can actually now use React inside terminals, which is great. My app is using React, so it'll kind of connect together pretty well. The idea or the vision I have is that you are inputting commands, but they're more like English. You don't have to actually know the commands. The AI system will be smart enough to understand what you're asking it, as long as you, provided a decently guardrailed input. You can't just be random about it. But there's other kind of guardrails that I want to implement for the user, maybe like a legend or like maybe like a cheat sheet or something of how to use these commands. Maybe some kind of integration with the UI registry, so you can actually pick which UI elements you want to use to create a more complex component composition, or that's the idea. But before we get to all that, we want to create like a proof of concept where you're inputting a command into the terminal in Gen UI mode, and then it'll render a component outside of the terminal, but it'll also give you like an output in the terminal telling you which tool was used to do this and the data model that it has outputted that can be used to basically generate this component. And maybe it'll even have like user, it'll request additional input from the user to, fill in some data, which you can either bypass by saying just randomize it, or you can tell it to have a specific title, a specific image, all of that, specific icons. I want it to be as easy to use as possible, basically. But yeah, that's the idea here. Let me switch over to my browser and show you what I got here. So I got some logs going to test stuff, and you don't see it in my screen on your screen here, but in my terminal sidebar here, I have a chat message, a log that you know, gives you the parts with an object and an array, an ID, and the role, which is the user. So yeah, the chat part works. I'll expand on it later. I'll give it more capabilities, but for now it's fine because I don't plan to use this chat that much. It's mainly just for testing right now. Eventually, the chat mode will probably just go away in favor of a terminal, an actual terminal. Like if you ever seen Claude Clee, Claude Code Clee, it'll look something like that. If you've seen like Claude Auto, let me see if I can find that. Claude Auto, something like this. So autonomous multi-session AI coding. So this is like a Kanban project, but there is a terminal feature, and there was some terminal stuff that I found that I can use. I think it was, let me see if I can find it. One sec. I got that tab saved somewhere. I'm just gonna find. I got so many tabs saved. It's ridiculous. Let's see. Somewhere around here. Maybe I didn't save it. I'm not sure. Pretty sure I did. Just don't remember how far back. Huh. Where did I save that? We got Zig, which is an editor I wanted to use to test it out. Oh, here it is. I just didn't give it a tag. Just tag it so I'll remember. I can easily find it later. Something like this. Don't mind the background noise. Not this. This is just basically like a UI component for a terminal. I might use it. I might not. I don't know if I need it, but it's nice to have that if I need it. I'm probably gonna use something like this, or most likely this. And this is like a web terminal that is a wrapper around Xterm.js, a React wrapper around Xterm.js, and it lets you create basically a web terminal, like which is a terminal that works on the website, on the web app. That will be this piece right here. So the chat feature might go away, might not. I probably will have it as like it'll probably be a mode, but the actual terminal itself will be a terminal, and it'll have different modes. These different modes can be layered inside a session. I'm still figuring that part out, whether I want mode and sessions to be separate things, whether like a session can only be a single mode, or can a session be multiple modes. It'll probably be multiple modes, but I'm gonna have to like partition them or section these out. So for example, let's say you start a session as by default it starts as a chat, right? But you switch to Gen UI, and depending on how much time you spend in a mode, that session will be saved as a Gen UI mode session. But in the history or the memory of it, it'll have some kind of log or reference to, you know, which modes you've used, and that way you can switch modes in the session and retain context. For example, chat, I know it's kind of like too broad, so maybe planning. But let's say you have like a planning session where you plan out some UI features. So you would obviously go through a chat kind of session with your agent or AI assistant, whatever you want to call it, and it'll ask you a bunch of questions and create a plan for you. Then you can switch modes to Gen UI and say the Gen UI will have access, the Gen UI agent will have access to that plan already in context, and it can reference it to generate components. And as far as like planning goes for Gen UI, as I said before, ideally I want to connect this to the UI registry, which is a separate app that I have here. And you can tell it, you can specify, like you can leave it blind, but you can also specify it like, hey, I want you to use these components, this set of components together to create this component. So you kind of like help plan it out, and the Gen UI bot, agent, whatever, will follow that command or follow those rules to basically create a more complicated composition for you, but it'll like keep it on guardrails, so you're not letting it, you know, you're not setting it off, you're not letting it off the leash. You're kind of like telling it what to do, and it's doing it for you. So it's, the goal is to eliminate the labor of you know, looking at the docs for all those components, start figuring out how to piece them together. All you're doing is reviewing the end result and correcting it when it messes up. So that's the goal with this Gen UI mode here. But for now, I will build a very simple POC that will generate some components inside like a layout here outside of the terminal, which is a separate state container, and these two separate states will communicate, and a wrapper, like a more higher up state, will kind of like make them talk together. So this state container doesn't really care about the full state of the terminal, so it's not looking at the message partials or message parts. It only needs the output, so the final output that you confirm here will go here, and it'll, you know, render something for you to look at. Yeah, so let's get started. I'll close this off, and I will try to get something going, but first there is some issues that I need to resolve, and the main issue for this feature is there's a disconnect or a desync between the server and the client state changes, and that is with the actual mode switch context, and that is when you switch modes, it changes the API endpoint. So right now it's not doing that in the server, it's only switching it on the client side. So this is this can be solved in multiple ways. The way I am going to solve it right now is by creating a dynamic route for the terminal screen itself, and that is already being set up for me. I already set it up this way because I already foresaw this problem. I just need to fix it now, and that is this page here in the terminal. As you can see, it's only loading a single component with this initial use terminal hook. The use terminal hook is supposed to be changing the API endpoint. It does do this on the client side, right? But because for some reason it doesn't, you know, there's a desync. This is a very common problem with React. A way to get around that is, well, one idea is to initialize this inside here. Another idea is to create a switch case that, you know, update this use terminal hook to pass a parameter and let it know which mode it is. So instead of it getting the mode from internal state, which is probably desynced, it's telling it specifically, hey, I want this mode to be this, and you do that by creating a dynamic route that will look at the endpoint in the route or the parameter in the route, and when it switches based on the mode here, it'll specifically tell this hook here to set the mode instead of pulling it from the state, which is being set right now in here in a client-side component. And I mean, you can solve this another way. You can have like a use effect, which I don't really want to do. I want to avoid use effects as much as possible. I want to localize side effects inside like smaller components, not inside hooks. I did this here, or rather the AI did it for me. See, like this can be consolidated into a single side effect instead of having 3 separate ones, because it's still looking at chat, right? So instead I can probably have this in a single side effect, so I only refresh it once, not 3 times. That's another story. That'll be like an optimization stage, which I don't really care about because I'm more concerned about proving the concept and making it work. And then I can go into like the nitty gritty and clean stuff up and, you know, properly optimize it where there's a limited number of refreshes, and the refreshing itself is controlled by conditional checks or state value checks, where it's only like changing it based on the actual state changes, not all the time. You also don't want, well, in this case it's fine because this is like a slot here for the terminal. But ideally, you don't want use client pages. Kind of want to contain that inside a component. So like I would probably move this here. I'll have terminal content be like a controller almost. And this controller component will piece together like multiple components to determine which content to load based on the mode and based on the session, based on the context. All of that will kind of like work together to generate for it to load again. So that's one advantage of not using like a client-side page in this case. So you kind of like nest that all inside this component, which you have already as a separate component. Which is the reason why I set it up like this. So you have like server-side pages, you have a client-side components kind of working together, and you have like well, Jotai already handles that for you, but you're kind of like if you weren't using Jotai, you're using like a React provider, context provider, then you would have to like wrap it in a suspense boundary and create like a loading state so you can load parts of your app instead of waiting around for this whole thing to load, which you don't really want to do because that's an optimized user experience. It's not ideal. I mean, it's good for like a very small level app, but the idea behind this app, it's going to grow large with huge features. I already foresee it with having like separate modes, separate sessions, all that. So you want to plan for it. You can't just build it and fix it later. It's going to take way longer. It's going to be more frustrating, more bugs, because if you build it a certain way and then you fix it later, it's a recipe for disaster. Yeah. So let's fix the issue of the mode switching on the client side, but not switching the API, the backend API. Although it is telling me here, although it's telling me here, right, that the API is changing, the actual backend is telling me that no, the API is still chat, and that doesn't change. And as I said before, that's the reason for that is mainly this, the desync that happens here with this initializer, because this page only loads once, and I'm not switching pages when I'm switching modes. So I gotta make this page from static page to a dynamic page, basically. I think that would be like the best solution going forward. It's a little bit more scalable than managing it inside a client-side component, which will force me to like break up my client-side component too early into different partials, so which I will want to do eventually, but for now I think the best solution would be to create a dynamic page and make this a server-side route just to make it more flexible in the future if I want to hydrate data. So let's do that. How would we do that? It's a good question. Let's see. I'm going to turn this browser on so I can. Well, let me go back here. Next, docs. So we have layouts and pages, right? What I want to know, or is this something that's still I'm confused about, and that is can a slot route, which I'm trying to find in the docs here, right? Can a slot route have dynamic pages? I think it can, but like how does that work? Because it's a slot, you're not routing, right? It's loading in like a partial, or like it's loading like a part of your app, right? Yeah, I mean, old school devs will know this is a partial, but I don't know what they call it now. They call it slots or whatever. I don't know. Whatever it is the API decides, I guess. But to me, it's a partial. Let's see. So slots, right? Parallel routes. They're called parallel routes. Okay. So can a parallel route in Next.js have dynamic pages? All right. That I don't know. Or maybe it can. I'm pretty sure it can, because seems like a good feature to have. But how is it going to work? Looks like interceptions, right? So you can intercept routes. So is that something I want to do? That's what I got to figure out here. So all it takes is loading, or not loading, reading a bunch of docs, right? The good thing about Next app router, or one of the good things, there's a lot of bad about it that I'm sure you heard of. But one good thing is that it kind of abstracts these things for you, where you have to create suspense boundaries for loading states and error states. You can just create a file for it, which I like because it helps you to move faster. The problem is knowing how to do that, because this is relatively new. I think it's over a year old, almost 2 years old now, that app router has been introduced. I think I've been learning it since 2024, and I haven't tried all of the methods that are available by it. So there's always something new I get to figure out. But I have played around with what are they called, parallel routes before. Just never had to create a dynamic parallel route. I also am kind of wondering, hey, can I group layouts, or can I group pages inside a parallel route? That'll be interesting. Like, what if, for example, per different modes, as they grow in complexity, can I have like groups inside the terminal, the parallel route, for example, like, in parentheses, so you can do group routes. Can I do that inside a parallel route? Can I have dynamic pages for each group? Can I have like separate layouts for different groups? That I don't know. I haven't really dived too deep into it. It'd be interesting to see, but basically abstracting a lot of the routing or the router logic or router functionality by creating file system routes. And you are following like some kind of syntax in a way, because whatever code is running in the background, that's like abstracted from you, so you don't have to think about it. It's like in a black box almost. It is doing something. It's still using some kind of router, and it's looking at namespace conventions, like for example, the at for parallel route. It'll look for that and it'll know like it's a slot, it's not a page. So how does it do that in the background? I'm curious to find out. And like, what are the limitations of that feature? See, like route groups is this what I'm talking about. It's like, can you have route groups inside parallel routes? I don't know, because the docs never really address it. They only like tell you the basics, and it's up to you to find out. So as you're playing around with it, as you're learning, you kind of discover on your own what are the strict rules for using this, and how do you get around some things? How do you and at that point, you pose questions to the team, to the next team, and then see what they say. Maybe even propose your own features from that point. So I don't want to get too deep into it. I just want something basic for now. So I want to find out, can I have dynamic routes in parallel routes? Dynamic routes, I mean these right here. Do you see this? So essentially I would have something like, at least for my use case, I would have something like this, right? Where it's like mode, right? And then in here you'll have a page, right? Now, is this possible? Is this possible? I would assume I need a layout, right, to load the page. Otherwise, I can try just basically deleting this, maybe moving this here, right? But before I try that at all, let me do some research, I guess. And believe it or not, research is kind of do people do research anymore? I don't know. Like, do they just ask AI and they say, "Hey, can this be done?" See, I don't do that. Sometimes I do that if I know it can be done, like in the back of my mind, like, "Hey, this has been around long enough where I can be like, yeah, this is probably possible. Let me just ask AI how to do it," and they'll most of the time it works. But then like for questions like this, I have no fucking idea. So I have to like see what the community says. Like, are there any discussions about this? Next.js. Parallel routes with dynamic segments. Huh. Seems like it's possible, right? Hmm. There is a discussion. That's good. It's unanswered. Not good. Asked in 2023. Uh, uh, so it seems like a lot of people had this idea. This is my file structure. 2 slots. Uh-huh. So your default is outside of your, okay. That's not a good sign. Query params. Mm-hmm. Broker billing. Settings. Got it. Okay. What the fuck? Why? Um. Uh-huh. Okay, people put their stuff in that. I don't like that. What if you want? What if your component here is similar to this? You know what I mean? That's why for me, like the app router is the router. I don't know how you guys do it, but for me, the app router is specifically routing. So I don't want to put my components in there. You know what I mean? Um, I'll maybe have like an action or an API call or something, but I'd rather have that in an API endpoint or an API route with like a route.ts file. Um, this is one of the things that confused a lot of people about the new Next app router thing because yes, there's a lot of stuff, but like once you start thinking about like how would this work, how would this work, how do you do this, how do you do this, you do run into a lot of walls because there's not a lot of edge cases or use cases out there yet. Like like the docs cover basic stuff, but for example, like parallel routes with dynamic segments. That should be possible in my opinion, but I don't know why it's not. It seems like it's working. Maybe it doesn't. What does this guy say? Hold on. Um, yeah. So navigation is breaking because obviously the dynamic segment assumes it's a route, but it's being loaded inside a slot. So it might mess with the router history or something. That's why I said like if you want total control of your app routes, you don't rely on um, a file system router unless you build it yourself, which you can do, but that'll take so much fucking work. Holy shit! You might as well just use the router API, like a TanStack router, for example, or React router. I don't even really know what router React uses nowadays. So there's a couple. I don't know if they merged together again or not. Oh man, this is so annoying. So I don't like front end. The front end ecosystem is very competitive. A lot of people just, compete with each other instead of kind of like building off of each other's stuff or contributing to somebody else's code. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because it's so new that nobody really knows what the best solution is yet. Backend has been around for years now, so there's always like a consensus. Plus, a lot of backend engineers have traditional computer science backgrounds, whereas front end engineers don't. So, front engineers end up reinventing the wheel a lot. I'm I'm one of them. I do that a lot. Like I I find my own ways of doing things, and I think they're the best, and I stick with them. Sometimes I learn they're not, but you know, it is a good way to learn. So that's the important part. Um, I think that's what's happening in a nutshell with the front end community. They're just always competing against each other. I mean, there's a lot of people working together more than ever now than before. Um, and it'll only get better over time. There are stuff that I'm not happy with that, you know, the community decided, hey, this is how we're gonna do it. But I think it's a lot better to just, you know, work with that than try to compete. You can compete, but you're gonna waste your time. Unless that's what you want to do, you know, that's your goal, then go for it. My goal is building products or tools and software for people to work on products. So there's like a library or a way of doing things, I'll try to follow that. So I'm not spending like a year or 2 years, you know, in architecture or theoretical stuff. Like a freaking file system router that's better than that, and then Next, you know, like a plug, for example, like a plugin for Next or something that enhances their app router and makes parallel routes with dynamic segments possible. I'd rather just go to the next team and be like, hey, can we do this? And then open up a PR and see what they say. Most of the time it's ignored. So, I don't know. So let's see if it's possible first, before I even attempt to do this, because another solution that I have, if it's not possible, is to create separate components that switch modes with an initializer inside the component. That way the mode switch will load a different component, and that kind of acts as a page change, but it's still the same slot route, you know, the functionality is the same. The solution is different, like the end result is the same, the solution is different. And at the end of the day, the end result is what you care about. Let's see. I don't like default. Like, what is the point of default? Like, it was never really. Maybe it was explained on like a talk somewhere, but on the docs it doesn't really. Like, is your default page the same as your page, or is it like a fallback skeleton? What is it? What is it supposed to be? It's obviously not the loading page, right? So you can't show a skeleton, but what if your actual page depends on data? Like, what if it's like a dynamic page, for example, like this use case? What do you do then? I don't know. I don't know what you do. What I think these guys are missing is a layout. So, I don't know why this conversation died, but maybe I can solve it. I don't think if it works for me, then it'll work for them. So what I think is going on here is that they need a layout, because the layout is specifically telling the page, hey, these children load through this page. So if I don't have a page, I have a layout that basically returns children. This should technically work in the back end. I'm assuming. I don't know. We'll see if it actually works. Maybe I'm like a freaking some kind of genius that sees the code without even looking at it. I would like that to be the case, but I'm probably wrong most of the time. But we'll see. Let's try that. So instead of this, we won't have a page. We'll have a layout. The layout is basically like a. We'll load this. It'll be like a. I don't know if you ever set up your own routes, like Angular or like old school create React app without Next, using like a React router. Your routes, your child routes or like nested routes need to have like a slot to pass through, like kind of like a window. I'm sure like in the back end, or like somewhere deep down in the code in low levels, using like a React slot or something, or React portal. Pretty sure the React portal is what's going on here. But let's see, return or export default terminal layout, and it's just a fragment, right? So we don't care about any overlay, maybe inside this layout we'll do this, like the terminal content will be like the layout, you know, so like it'll have some kind of process on the front end or the client side rather, because the layout is server side. So it'll sort of like pick up mode switching and sort of work to change the state as you're changing the pages. But right now the layout is just a simple fragment, so I'm guessing that's what they're missing in their solution. So the page itself here, we'll delete this, and let's say we say that this will be params mode. What is this? Oh. See, I don't like AI coding for me like this. Okay. So we just want to see what happens, right? What are these params? Do they work? Let's see. So far, nothing good happened. I don't see any result. We have our div, which is coming from the parent layout, the dashboard layout, and it's empty. Not a good sign. Can we log something maybe here? That's definitely read only. I'll console log this. So far, nothing happened. Not getting a log, not getting anything. So that wasn't the case. The layout was not the case. Default null. Maybe it's loading the default page. Let me see. Default terminal page. I'll do that. Right. Okay, that's definitely what's happening here. So what happens if I do this? Right. Okay. So now we're getting somewhere, right? And we're getting some errors too. Terminal page is an async client component, but it's saying that it's front with a client side component. Oh, we don't want that. Obviously, we don't want that. So it seems like dynamic segment routes are binded to your routes, so you are kind of stuck using them. So how do you organize this with your UI, right? Because this is a parallel route / slot / partial. I'll call it a partial moving forward. So this is a partial in your dashboard. Ideally, I want this page to be binded to your router, because you see here, it's not finding it, it's finding it here. So how do you control two different routing states? I want this terminal to be persistent with the dashboard layout, which it is now. So like as I'm navigating, let's say / settings or whatever, like here, I still have access to the terminal, and the terminal will control my routing for me. For example, I'd say like, hey, take me back here. I'll tell the agent or the chat, whatever. I'll tell the agent, hey, or let's say I'm doing Gen UI, I say generate this component, and I'm like on the settings page. It'll generate it for me, and it maybe will ask me, hey, do you want to go and see the page where I generated this? It'll probably create like a dynamic page for me that has like its own version control or whatever. It's mapped out to Git. It's far in the future, right? But that's the issue here, right? Like you can't have routes. You have to have query params here, right? So like mode will be a query param. Somebody probably mentioned that in the discussion, the Next.js discussion for parallel routes and dynamic segments. So the mode context switching will be here, right? Mode equals, let's say Gen UI, right? Or chat or whatever. But I don't want query params because I don't need them. My session will store my active mode or the last mode. So like the mode will be bound to the session, but consider the session is like the higher order class, right? It's a terminal session. If you ever use the terminal, you have like all these tabs, right? So like I think eventually I'll change this styling to like a tab, and I'll make this like draggable, so I can make the terminal as big as I want, or like it'll have like a limit, obviously. I don't want to go into the UI stuff yet, but imagine this is like a tab in your terminal, so each tab is its own session, right? So it'll have its own context, and the reason for doing that is you don't want your terminal sessions to be connected. Maybe you do, but not for my use case. I want them to be separate, right? They have their own state, they have their own context, they have their own history, and it's for a specific purpose. So you're not, if you want a new session, open a new terminal tab and it'll start your new session, right? That's the idea. But the session itself has different modes. So that's where you have like, hey, this session in the terminal, it's like a default terminal mode. It's like a basic terminal with Claude code, right? And then I want to change that mode from default to, I don't know, generating UI, right? For example, because that's what we're rolling with today. So that's when it creates like another layer on top of the default session, or the default terminal session or mode rather, and it'll give me like tools for doing that, and like I guess UI output in the terminal for doing that, where the user can select what components they want to use for a specific task. It'll break it all down for you to make the Gen UI process more manageable, so you're not kind of like, you know, attacking it blind. You have some kind of structure behind it. So if the terminal itself is a partial and it's persistent across routes, that means it's on the dashboard level, right? Right now this app is just dashboard, but I grouped it out in case I want the sandbox to just be more than a dashboard. The dashboard is like a core feature of it. So how do you do that? You can't do that with Next, apparently. That feature doesn't exist. So you got to figure out a way to do it. Some people here suggested, hey, you want query params to handle it, but I don't want to do that because then I have to manage this shit. And so like when I load a new session, I have to update the URL query params, and why do you want that? Like, when it's already internal state, right? I guess like if you want to link it to somebody, but if you're linking it to somebody, do you want people to access your terminal sessions like other people? I don't think so. Like not in my use case. So it seems redundant to have another. Basically, it's another state that you're controlling, and you have to sync up to your internal state engine, update the URL. It's just another layer you have to worry about. So no URL params. You're stuck with the defaults here, right? I wonder if we have another method for fulfilling this edge case. I'll call this an edge case. And what I'm assuming it is interception, route interception. So let me read up a little bit about this. Do I want route interceptions? Because it seems like that is what I want, but can you do this with parallel routing? Because I'm pretty sure I ran into this problem when I was working on another AI feature back in the day, or another AI concept, which is this thing right here. I wonder if it's still up. I'm pretty sure it's still up. Yeah, this thing where I wanted to like translate books. I don't know if it even works anymore. Let's see. Oh yeah, it has like a drop down. You have to wait. Let me see if maybe my API key expired. Yeah. There's a problem with having. Well, it worked. Okay, cool. So let's say I click this, right? So what this does is, this is using like an early version of AI SDK, or it's supposed to pull the data from like a book library. It was doing it in the background. There's like no loading state, but basically it's pulling the data from like an API for about the book, right? It gives you a summary, and then it like changes it to like a more modern version where you can kind of like relate to it more. I don't know if it did it though. Seems like it did the same thing. These are old models though, so like as I said, you need guardrails, because I know I specifically told it, hey, create like 21st century people, something more relatable. But I need to give it like a more stronger prompt engineering, like I guess, like which part of the U.S. you want this to cater to, like urban youth in NYC, or somebody that lives out in like, I don't know, in the Midwest. So you'll get a different result based on that. So like that's something I never got to. But back to my original thought is like when I was working on this, these are parallel routes, by the way, too. So like this is a separate route for like the legacy or like the OG version, and this is the new version. Seems like it's doing the same thing. So it's not working. It was working before just fine, but that's why AI is kind of you gotta babysit the AI. You know, it gets lazy, just like real people. So it seems like modal has an intercept, right? But the intercept is for like an existing route. So like for example, like if I had a page for modes already, which I don't want, like why would I want that outside a terminal? Then you can like intercept those pages and put them here. So like the use case for that is in Next.js land, or this docs is like, hey, what if you want a modal for all your photos, right? For example, like you have a platform where you upload a bunch of shit, right? Like all your assets or your photos, and then you have somewhere down the line you have a modal for like picking them, right? Through like a user flow, like you're creating a profile or whatever. Then that makes sense, right? But for my use case, it doesn't make sense, because the terminal is a closed system that has its own state, but it communicates with the rest of your app, just the data that the rest of the app needs. So it's a completely different use case. So I don't think intercepting routes will work for me. Then, the discovery from all of this is that since Next.js app router is limited in scope with what you can do or achieve with your parallel routes, I don't want to use the router to change the mode. If this app was just a terminal, I can do that, but it's not. It's way beyond that. The terminal is just a core feature, right? But these are the problems that you're into pretty often as you're working on big apps, and that's why architecture is so important, because you got to like think about this stuff before you code yourself into a corner. And then you have to like do some hacky shit to get out of it, which is never nice, because A, you're the only person that knows how it works, and B, it's not scalable outside of your specific use case or edge case. So like month or years down the line, somebody will come, and they always do. And they're like, "Hey, I want to do this now," and you're like, "Oh shit, that's totally impossible." But then this is like some kind of, like a high-level product manager or exec that wants you to do it, and then you have to like pull a rabbit out of your ass to do it. It's never fun, never fun, because you're doing way more hacky shit that's untestable, and it'll just break your code. It'll create optimization issues. It'll create a whole set of problems that you really don't want to get into as you're working on shit like this. So that's why it's important to do it right. Like the core of your app has to have rules, but it'll also be flexible enough where you can break them in a way that the API allows for. So what I discovered now is I can't do this, right? Let me switch back to this. I can't do this, right? So this is something we want to avoid entirely. So let us revert those changes. We'll change this to a page for now. We'll come back to what we had before. Right. Oops, I didn't save that. Interesting. What the fuck did I just do? I don't need that. Don't save. Oh, okay, that's just next cache. Okay. So I delete this. I don't need that. So your defaults, we'll just return null, right, for now. I don't know what the default's supposed to, like, what is it for? Like in my use case, what is this for? Like, what do I put here? I can't obviously put this. Maybe I have like a default terminal state. I'll just put it there, but yeah, I gotta read up on that. This is like I guess that's why a lot of people didn't like the direction that the next team went with this app router, because there's a lot of questions, and like all those questions have already been answered by sticking to the page router, right, that I've been using for years now. But then now, aside from refactoring, you now have to understand how the app router works. What are these limitations? What can you do with it? Like, what are the rules, right? What are the specific rules? What are the edge cases? None of that exists yet. Like, as you just saw right now, I figured that out. Like, even this, even that discussion that is closed, it's not even being answered. So should I have I probably should have built this outside of Next, but I didn't want to, because I want to use Vercel features for this project. The idea is an incubator, so I want devs to move fast. I wanted to incubate the ideas in like Vercel, using all the tools and features, because the Vercel team is obviously controlling where React goes. They bought Nuxt too. It's crazy, but I'm just betting on Vercel at this point to set the standards for React in a way. So I'm kind of like saying, okay, fine, I'll work with this. The idea of an incubator, again, is to let you bake your ideas fast, get them to market fast. All the thinking is done for you for the most part. All the tools exist, so I'm giving that step. I'm going to step further and saying here's an opinion architecture you can use to bake multiple brands with the same source code. You can containerize your apps so they're running on different servers if anything, if that's what you want. And if an idea works, you can commit to it using the existing code base, which is this incubator architecture infrastructure. So you don't even have to leave Vercel if you like it that much. Like if it works for you, fine. Or you have the option to, migrate it over, and I'll eventually build some tools to make that possible. Or you can, migrate it into like a separate repo where you still keep your incubator going with other ideas, but now you're a proven app, one of the brands that succeeded. You have a separate environment for it, a separate code base, so you can, take it wherever you need to without affecting your incubator code and environments. And decoupling from Vercel, yes, that's also in the back of my mind. Is it important? Probably not, because it depends where you are. Like, right, for the most part, startups won't care, but maybe like large enterprises that have to decouple due to regulations or whatever, they need like their own private servers, they need their own private tools, they need their own private AI models, all of that. I mean, that's healthcare is one example, right? Then you offer them tools to do that, where you just, eject your code out of Vercel, out of the incubator environment, and migrate it over using some kind of CLI tool, and obviously dev oversight. Hopefully somebody that actually knows the code from day one, or smart enough to like understand how everything works, and refactor it in a sense. Let's see. So second solution is, as I said, the main problem is initializing here in the page. So what I want to do is terminal content. I want to make this like a kind of like a higher order component in a sense. I don't know if the concept is being used still today, but early stages of React is pretty popular. So basically what you're doing is like it's kind of like a controller in a sense. It's not a component, it controls what will be displayed. So right now I have the mode switch the content of like a similar template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this terminal content into a controller, and then I will create separate components for these different modes, these different terminal modes. So I will have a switch case here that will sort of handle this for me, and the component itself will load based on the mode change in the state. See if that works. Maybe it won't, but we'll see. I'm predicting it will, because I am not pulling this from state. I am kind of like saying I'm passing a parameter instead. So when the parameter changes, the state will already be changed ideally. So I would probably have to convert this into a function that, instead of calling it here, I'm already saying the API endpoint will know, or the use chat hook will know that the API endpoint is coming in as a parameter, as a prop, instead of like doing it out here. Maybe I can do this as like a use effect to make this easier. I mean, it'll solve the problem. Let's try that. Let's see what AI thinks. All right, so we'll say this doesn't work. This doesn't switch the API endpoint on the server, only client. So the model doesn't change when I change the mode in the UI. I think the mode needs to be updated inside a memo or use effect. So model. Let's see what it says. See, like AI completely missed that, right? Which is fine if you know what you're doing, or if you understand the library or framework that you're working with on a deep enough level. You can catch these things and say, hey, do this instead, and then the LLM will adjust based on your input and sort of fix your code, you know? See, like this is what it says. It's saying, hey, let's create a new transport memo where it just changes the endpoint and you bind it here. Will that work? We'll see. Maybe it will, right? So let's test it. Hello, which model are you running? ChatGPT 4. Okay, so if I switch to agent or Gen UI mode, it should be Anthropic. What model are you running now? Okay, that didn't work. And let me look at my logs on the server side here. It's still pointing to chat, API chat, API/AI/chat. It should be API/AI/Gen UI. So how do we solve this? Obviously the use effect didn't work. Will my solution work? I don't want to do it unless I'm sure, because it's a lot more work. So let me bounce ideas around with the AI a little bit and see what it says, see what it thinks about this approach. Seems like the problem may be with this page, which I already pointed out. Maybe here, since the use terminal hook is initialized on page load and the page for the terminal parallel route. I'm going to scope next app router. Is loaded once. It does not re-initialize when the terminal mode in the terminal footer component is, and let me give it context. Where is that? There it is. Okay. Is changed. The server doesn't realize that the mode which switches API endpoint has changed. I think initializing instead of initializing the use terminal hook once in the page, we should be reloading the we should be reloading the component, which will call use terminal with a param for mode to change the mode, which should change the API endpoint. And we're going to say, please do a minor, or not a minor, but a minimal refactor to change the terminal page into a server component that simply loads terminal content and make terminal component into a sort of controller, which will have a switch case to load different components. And by what I mean by load is mount, unmount different components based on the mode and call use terminal with param, the mode param, as well as I don't want to give it too much info because then it'll just lose itself. So let's maybe do that. Please create smaller components for different modes. Terminal chat, terminal agent, terminal UI gen. Let's see what it does. I'm sure like the LLM will like understand what I want. Like I don't want to give it too many details. You kind of want to keep it on track. And the more stuff you tell it to do, the more it'll just go crazy and start changing too much shit. That's why I specified minimal refactor, because I don't want it to change a bunch of files. I want it to just work with what it has. If I want to refactor something, I will, I'll create a plan for it, and I will, take it. I'll basically babysit the LLM refactor as it goes through it. And most of the time when I did refactors of LLMs, it wasn't pretty, or it like missed a lot of the things it said. So like the best way to do it is to do it step by step, and which is basically how real refactors work without LLMs. You kind of like refactor your code piece by piece. You don't want to refactor the entire thing. If you're going to refactor your entire code, you might as well just create a new version and work on it in parallel. That's usually the best approach. So like if you have like a version 1 and you're working on version 2, you'll have like a dedicated team that's still working on version 1 and all the new features that the clients expect and want fixed. But you also have like a dedicated team that's working on version 2, which is a completely separate project, completely separate source code. And most of the time when you do that is like you have like a big monolith project that's completely unoptimized and has a lot of bugs and a lot of tech debt that you just want to build like smaller versions of your app for like specific clients. That's usually the case when that happens. And right now it's kind of like shifting back to monolith. People preferring monoliths when AI came out. Don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. It seems like we're kind of like spinning in circles a lot of the time. But that's just nature of, that's just human nature, right? Kind of like doomed to repeat. We're kind of like stuck in cycles if you think about it. On a higher level, just cycles of like war and peace, blame cycles, like, hey, these guys did this, these guys did that, blah, 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 and that always changes. And it's kind of depressing, but also kind of cool, because it's like, you kind of see that, and you kind of see that in code, and like on smaller scales as well, which I think is very interesting. because you can, you can sort of like fight the tide, or you know, create like your own little oasis off of that knowledge, and you know, sort of survive off of that, which I think a lot of shifts in history have occurred that way. Like the Bronze Age, for example. Somehow people decided to use bronze, or like Iron Age, where all of a sudden iron's way stronger than bronze, right? Or you can have, like, if you go further back, the agricultural shift from hunter-gatherer societies. There's always, like, somebody that finds some way of doing things better that you can't possibly ignore anymore, and people just switch over out of the blue. It creates big shifts in thinking, big shifts in understanding, and just changes the course of history completely. And that's, I think that's happening all the time in tech, on like a much faster scale. You'll always find ways of doing things better. You'll always find new solutions to problems, and those solutions will create a ton more problems, which you will have to fix and you'll have to figure out, and you will have to kind of work with. And you just got to, get used to that. That's just the way things are, especially in the tech world. So if you don't like, relearning, if you don't like changing your perspective, or, if you cling to your ways too much, maybe tech isn't for you, maybe you want to do something else. I don't want to say that though, because it might not be true. Maybe your way of doing things is still correct. Like maybe a lot of the paradigm shifts are unnecessary, maybe we're just reinventing the wheel over and over just so we can get clout, or keep our six-figure salary. Who knows? I'm pretty sure that's a lot of that is out there as well. So let's see what the AI came up with. It said, basically followed my instructions to a T, kind of. It says, hey, we have your terminal content, which is basically our controller, right? And that renders different modes with components, and each component is calling use terminal with a parameter, and that parameter is basically, it's not pulling it out of state, which is desynced, right? Because the state changes don't propagate to the client-side hook without a refresh, without some kind of reloading or remount or re-render, which we're not doing because it's a dynamic route. I don't know what the fuck that means. It's not a dynamic route, I'm sorry. It's a parallel route, which I guess I'm not using parallel routes the way they're intended to be. Maybe I am, I don't know. Maybe these edge cases have not been considered yet, or they're just too annoying to implement. So we're doing a workaround. We're unmounting and demounting different components in the controller of this page here, which just loads this, which is fine, because now our page is a server component, and this will allow us to hydrate data into content if we need to, like from memory, for example. Eventually we're going to have like a database that takes your terminal sessions and loads them in. So like you want to load all these. If you come back here, like if I refresh the page, like let's say blah blah blah, I refresh the page, I want that to persist. So that's where you kind of like, sorry, I didn't show you what I was doing. So like let's say I do this, right, blah blah blah, I switch to the mode, I did something, and I refresh, I want this session to persist, and that's where you need a database to get the data of your previous session, load it in, load all the conversation history, blah blah blah, make sure it's loading on the correct mode of that session, and same thing when I switch these previous sessions, which don't really do anything right now. That doesn't work right now because we need a database, we need to store all that data, we need to process it, and we need to map it to the correct state. So that's where data hydration comes in, and that's where it's very important where you have your layouts and page routes. Ideally, as server components because you can sort of like pull in cache data more easily. You don't have to worry about caching your data on the front end, which you can do with React Query and stuff like that. But I'm making use of Next.js features for this case. Let's go back to coding. Let me remove this browser because we don't need that. Let's review what we did here. I don't know why I did that, but okay. So it's calling use terminal here. Great. Terminal content is now a controller, as we said, which is basically a switch case with different components based on the mode. The mode is controlled still in the footer, so that should work. Although we did run into an error, we'll see that later. Empty state icon. So these are props that the display component, which I didn't really ask it to do this specifically, but what it's doing here, it's reusing the template that all of these mode components are using. Eventually, I will just have my own templates here. I don't know if I need a compositional template like this, but this works for our cases for now. And yeah, this is good. It was basically what I asked it to do, so I'll approve this. Here, they use terminal hook, which I'm thinking of breaking this up into different hooks for different modes. But for now, this works. But obviously, this will change as time goes on, as my requirements change, as I get deeper into the code and deeper into these different features based on the modes and stuff. But for now, this works for our use case. And what it's doing here is we're passing a parameter, mode parameter. This type we can just pull from here. So I'll do that right now. This is a good thing about, I guess this is kind of like a classical object-oriented programming, kind of like hybrid functional / OOP programming, but I don't know who gives a shit. To me, it's like, modular reusability, low-level reusability. And I guess that's more functional than object-oriented because you kind of like, instead of extending, you're kind of like using smaller pieces to create your construct or your composition, instead of, kind of like chaining different extensions together. Why don't you want to do that? Because it just becomes harder to track down your errors. The more extensions you have in JavaScript, at least, the harder it is to debug. And you also have like a lot of you're avoiding a lot of circular dependency logic, where you have instead you kind of like just have small pieces that you're always are coming from a specific source. You're not kind of like going crazy and extending them all for like one simple use case. It's basically like using tools to create things instead of having like a big tool that does one specific thing, if that makes sense. Terminal mode, what is going on here? There we go. Okay, I just complain about the type because it's your. So I have separate type imports, or try to have them. I don't know what the if there's a reason for for doing that, like an optimization reason. Maybe it's easier to tree shake. I don't know. I gotta look into that. There's a lot of low-level things like that I have no idea about. A lot of the patterns. I try to adapt as many patterns from the community as I can, but I also try to verify that the pattern makes sense. Because sometimes they don't make sense, and sometimes they're pretty bad patterns. Like for example, everyone had use effects in their components just to do like front end code operations, which is like changing styles and shit, like which is insane. Like you're reloading a bunch of components, like like oh man, the optimization issues with that is nuts. But I feel bad for the people that have like big projects that have those components because they didn't know any better. And now they have to essentially fix them if they want to work with newer versions of React and App Router and all that shit. Also one of the reasons why people hated App Router. So let's see. Is App Router good? I don't know. I don't know if I like it. It makes a lot of things easier. Would I use it for like my own like massive enterprise project? I don't know yet. I'll have to give it a few more. I'll want it to bake a little bit more, but for projects like this, kind of like betting on the future here. Like, yeah, this might be the way, This might be the way that people want to build Next or React apps, for example, the Vercel infrastructure. For the Vercel platform and all their stuff. So let's see what they have here. Man, my camera doesn't kind of gave up on tracking me, or this filter that I have for it, but whatever. I think that's because not enough CPU or something. I don't know what the fuck the problem is. I need a better effect for background removal. Probably just get a green screen because I don't really have anything to help with tracking. There's a bunch of shit behind me. All right. So ideally this works, right? Let me see if I can turn this on so you can see my test here. I'm gonna move this out of that. Okay, there we go. That's better, right? So the test is simple. What model are you running? And it says chat in the logs here, or the endpoint, the API point is chat. I'm going to change to this. On the front or the client side, the mode changed. What model are you running now? And it seems like on the back end, it also changed the model or the endpoint, which is good, but it broke. Well, it didn't break. I just don't have any credits. So it works, which is great because now you're seeing that, hey, your terminal session has different modes and you can switch different models. So the concept itself is proven. I just didn't realize I don't have any credits on my Anthropic account that I'm using because I haven't used Anthropic API for anything yet. I want to make the switch though. I want to make the switch to Claude Code API or CLI. I want to use the CLI more. So I'm switching to. I don't know if I'm switching, but I'm gonna table cursor and try out something more minimal, like what's that new editor, Zig. So I want to try out Zig this year because it's fresh and it's way faster, and it'll help me learn, or like it'll force me to learn or use um, Claude Code terminal more, because I want to basically use Claude Code terminal here for this project. So I need to start using it more. I used it a couple of times, but for my workflow is kind of like established with Cursor. I started using Cursor like 2 years ago or so. Really liked it beginning, but then they changed their payment model because I guess too many tokens are being used by users, so they gotta up the prices or it's unsustainable. That's pretty obvious. But see, like I'm pretty cheap when it comes to AI. Like I don't want to, because so many tokens are wasted. Like I try not to use it as much. I don't vibe code. I don't like have a bunch of agents and sub agents running to like loop through the same task. That might be cool if I am testing an idea and I want to set something up for like the sandbox app that I'm working on here, something like that. Just create a way to, hook up agents with sub agents to like run different tasks from like a higher level, like an architect level. And sandbox would be part of that process. But for my purposes, since I already know what I'm working on, what I'm building, I still want to kind of have control over that in like an affordable manner. I don't want to like spend a bunch of money on tokens that I know is like just looping over and over, like at least in the Ralph paradigm, for example, or the Ralph tool, the new Ralph tool, which is basically having the AI do the same thing using the same prompt. I don't know if I want that. I mean, that seems useful, but if you know exactly what you're building and you're like kind of like break it all down with some tooling, some AI assistance, I think the results will be much better, especially if you know, if you're like aware of your architecture and how to set it up, which I am hoping to achieve here with these concepts that I'm proving. So it's good to see that the idea worked, um, and I will improve this later, but this is good for now. See, like this component file here is growing, and it'll only grow bigger. The good thing is that it's still like organized pretty well, but see, like these, do we need this now? It seems like, why do we need this when we can just handle it here, right? So like this can just call this terminal display with like a hook above the return. That's something that the AI doesn't think about, doesn't care. It just follows directions to the T. I also don't really like components like this. Yes, it's useful for this specific use case now, but obviously these modes will be different. They'll have like different components, they'll have different structures. So the only thing useful here is probably this empty state, which I will probably just convert to a component itself, like empty terminal or new session or something, and reuse that inside like here, for example. I'm not showing you what I'm talking about. Let me go back. See, I gotta get used to switching scenes here when I'm talking about code and I'm talking about browser, but I'm talking about this right here. Like the AI did follow directions pretty well, but as you're coding, you're not gonna do this, right? Like, why would you do this, right? Especially to begin with, you can just basically do all this inside here, right? Using smaller pieces. Like for example, this empty state will be a component for sure, but that's the only part. Maybe this as well will be something reusable, but I think I can just build everything here. But then again, if you're doing tests, it helps to have, you know, different components for different stuff. That's kind of why I told it to do this, because I know in the future these are going to be huge. I might even have to like migrate them over to like separate files so that the tests are smaller. If I am going to be writing tests, I'm probably not. I don't really give a fuck about tests, especially for like side projects. If this project gets adopted and people like it, then I'll write tests to make sure that, you know, there's no issues with the code. But I don't know, I hate tests. The only tests I find useful are intent tests, like if you're integration tests, for example, if you're testing different modules or different front ends and back ends together, or like you have like a specific API with like a specific model, and you have a front end module with its own model that kind of like maps the API data to the front end component. That's when you need integration tests, because as you're working on that, the data model will most likely change. And then if you have code in production, you want to catch those issues before they go into production. So you'll have like a pipeline that runs those tests and makes sure that your different data models are synced up. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of fucking problems if you're not doing that, which I'm sure a lot of people have experienced before. So that's probably the most useful tests to write to begin with. Another reason I like integration tests or end-to-end tests using like things like Playwright or Cypress, for example, is you can write your tests based on behavior use cases like cucumber tests. So you can write your tests as cucumber statements, and you have like code that work off of those. So it'll be a lot more reusable. You don't have to write the same tests over and over. Like let's say you have like the same component that's used in different places. That, you know, I guess like a modal is a good example. Going back to that modal part, where like you have, let's say you have like an upload photo feature, and then you have like a modal that uses that feature to either upload more photos or select photos from like a library. That behavior or that abstraction can be abstracted with cucumber use cases, I guess you call them that, right? So you would have your tests following those. So you have to rewrite them, if you know what I mean. Like the code is already tested for that feature. You're just testing if it works with in that new window. So that's what the test will do. It'll like it already knows that the component works. It'll just make sure that it loads in there, and then whatever unit test you have for that feature is a separate thing. You don't really care about that. And if you're like a solo dev, or if you're like a small team, don't waste your time on unit tests, especially if you're especially if you know your components are going to change as your requirements change. Just test your front end and back end models with integration tests to make sure that you're not breaking anything that's in production. That's what I would focus on first. Plus, it'll also help you with automated QA. So you're not like testing your app yourself. You're relying on the integration test to do it for you. So you can just keep coding. Your tests fail, you'll go look and fix them. Yeah. I think I'm gonna call it. I think it was a good session. What I'm gonna do off screen, not off screen, but off stream, is set up my Anthropic API credits so I can actually use this Anthropic model in the new mode, and I'm going to set up some basic architecture for rendering UI tools. Well, basically, in the terminal, this is going to be an output from the agent or the AI system that will show me like a tool view component. So like it'll tell me which tool it's using, and then that data will be in the state, right, in my terminal state, and then I'll take that output and load a actual component, like for example like a weather component or a weather widget, in the main view of the dashboard. So like the terminal itself is not going to show you the UI component. It's just going to tell you which tool is going to be used to render that component, so you can debug it, right? You can like see what's going on. It's going to sort of like a triage thing, and it'll also tell you like the data that is available, so you can like base your component off of those properties. For example, like if you're talking about weather, it's going to be like the unit, which is Celsius Fahrenheit, which you can also control with the agent, the Gen UI agent, and the location, right? But also, instead of an object, it can also give you a list of for the full week, starting with that initial, the current date, the current day. That's the idea. That's going to be like the concept that I'm going to prove. So I'm going to set all that up. So like next time I come into the stream, which is probably tomorrow, I'll show you how that's set up, and I'll work on the actual third phase, which is probably the most important, and that is rendering the component in the dashboard view on the left, if the terminal's on the right, dashboard in the main view, right? And basically iterating over that. It's not giving you like a log of the same component in that list. It's changing it based on your input. So like if you tell it like, hey, give me the weeks instead of the day, it'll update that component to show you the week. And if you tell it like a different location, it will render it side by side, so you can compare them. Like let's say you want to compare New York and Boston, you can do that. So that functionality is in there. So you're basically visually looking at data that you're getting the AI to show you. That's the use case, or that's the POC right there. So I'll try to finish that part up. I'll try to get as much ready for that today, and then tomorrow we'll work on that piece. And that will entail like layering different layout containers to do that, because you got to create state to control where these components are going to be rendering. You can't just leave it up to the AI. So some kind of render component that renders the data, and then some kind of engine that controls the layout through state. So it can check. You can check both the terminal state, and you can check the dashboard state, and actually know where to update specifically. It's kind of like a mapping thing, you know. Yeah, that's gonna be fun. I'm excited about that, because practically you can take that concept and apply it to like different use cases, not just weather. The main use case for that would be comparing data visuals for different data sets, and data sets usually have properties for specific things, and that data belongs to somebody, right? If you're controlling like if you want to compare like analytics data for two different users, for example, right? There's a lot you can do with that concept, for example, basically. And I'll try to work on like a more practical, more real world example aside from weather. Weather is a good one to start with because a lot of the examples from AI SDK are using it, so I want to build on top of that first. Just easier to work with, and once that has been proven, I can I can expand on that for like real world applications. One of which would be analytics or data comparison. So data analysis and stuff like that. Another use case would be design, right? You're building like an app, and that wouldn't be more comparison, but you're still using the same engine, which is like, hey, it's mapping the layout for you as it builds, instead of like creating a completely new app from scratch or creating a new version. You are mapping parts of your layout as it's created, so you can tell the agent to narrow focus more, and you can ignore parts of it that you already like. For example, like if you tell it to build you I don't know, like a store, right? With like filters and like an e-commerce shop, right? With filters and like a big header or whatever, and you like the filter part, you like the sidebar filter, you like the product grid, but you don't like the header. All those pieces are already mapped in the layout in your dashboard. It has like different IDs, for example, let's say that. So you can tell it, hey, focus specifically on this header. I want to change this. So it's not going to touch everything. It's going to touch a little piece of it. So that's what I want to work on, because I think that's key. First of all, you're saving tokens because you're not redoing the entire page again, and you're just telling the AI. It's like a two different states, right? The AI state in the terminal is completely different from the state of the actual UI that you're generating. And version control would be another thing. I think that's something I would have to figure out, but I don't have to worry about that right now. Yeah, it'll be good. I think it'll be a good year, a good start, good project to start of the year. Hopefully, people find it useful. I know I'm going to be using it for some projects of my own. That's why I want to build this out first to, test the theory, so I don't have to do all of this concepting in my actual project code. I can come in clean and already know how to set everything up, and I know which concepts have already been proven, so I can expand on them, for specific use cases and specific features. Yeah, so that's gonna be it. Tomorrow, hopefully, if not tomorrow, then sometime next week, Monday, Tuesday, I don't know. We'll see. All right, let's call it here. Take care, everyone.